Today we're reading Acts 20, verses 7 through 16. Upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. And there were many lights in the upper chamber where they were gathered together. And there sat in a window a certain young man named Eutychus, being fallen into a deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep, and fell down from the third loft, and was taken up dead. And Paul went down and fell on him, and embracing him said, Trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him. When he therefore was come up again, and had broken bread, and eaten, and talked a long while, even till the break of day, so he departed. And they brought the young man alive, and were not a little comforted. And we went before to ship, and sailed unto Assos, there intending to take in Paul, for so he had appointed, minding himself to go afoot. And when he met with us at Assos, we took him in, and came to Mytilene. And we sailed thence, and came the next day over against Troas. The next day we arrived at Samos, and tarried at Trogyllium. And the next day we came to Miletus. For Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus, because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. Luke tells us that the disciples in Troas gathered together on the first day of the week. The reference to breaking bread likely refers to celebrating the Lord's Supper, or communion, but may also refer to a regular meal, or even to both. We see in several places in the New Testament where the early Christians chose to gather on the first day of the week, that being the day upon which Jesus rose from the dead. On this particular day, Paul met with them to instruct and comfort them as he was planning to leave the next day. He must have had a lot that he wanted to share, because at midnight he was still preaching. Luke tells us that they were in an upper chamber, the third loft he calls it in verse 9. He also points out that there were a lot of lights. Now, we don't know exactly what effect the lights had on poor Eutychus. Perhaps they caused the room to be warm, pushing him to sit in the wall opening for some cooler air. Or perhaps they flickered and cast shadows, causing him to get drowsy. In either case, the boy takes a seat in an opening in the wall, and upon falling asleep, falls to the ground below. Luke describes him as, quote, taken up dead. But Paul goes over to him and stretches out across him, similar to what we saw Elisha do with the Shunammite woman's son in the Old Testament. Paul states, his life is in him, and the boy comes back to life. This miracle that God worked through Paul is similar to what he did through Peter back in chapter 9 when he raised Dorcas from the dead. In both cases, the reason was to encourage and comfort the church. Have you ever thought about the lengths that God will go to encourage us? We only have to be alert and observant to see him working all around us and through us. Luke tells us that Paul ate something and then talked a long while, all the way to daybreak to be exact. Then Paul leaves. He sends his companions off on a ship while he walked to the next stop. I don't know, perhaps he wanted to spend some time in prayer along the way. Our passage ends with him in Miletus, where he will send for the Ephesian church leaders to talk with him. We'll see that in our next devotional.